Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Hey guys, Wolf of Dimensions here, and we will be commencing with Chapter 2 and 3 of Star Trek The Original Series book, The Savage Trade. So, without further ado, we're starting off with Chapter 2. Ensign Pavel Chekhov took a sip of his vodka and nodded sympathetically towards Ensign Jerry Thibodeau, who was seated across from him at a Recreation Room 6 table. "Go on," Chekhov said gently. "I don't know what came over me, Chekhov," said Thibodeau. "Call me Pavel," Chekhov said. "We are off duty. And I want to give you a space to speak freely without the worry that I may be filing a report," Chekhov thought to himself. Thibodeau nodded that he would. "Go on." "I saw where Spock was about to put his foot, and I just thought, we're all dead, and I froze. Then I backed away even though I saw Mr. Spock was in danger." Thibodeau took a sip of his beer. "No, that's not really right. What I was thinking was that I was dead. I didn't really care about anyone else at all in that moment." Thibodeau and Chekhov were seated at a corner table. Chekhov took another sip of vodka. He noticed that Thibodeau was now working on his second beer. "You haven't got used to danger yet. Real danger. It takes time, I know. Pavel, I spent 4 years at Starfleet Academy training my heart out. I was supposed to be ready. I requested security. There wasn't a simulation at the Academy that I didn't pass with flying colors." Thibodeau lowered his head and put a palm to his forehead. "All for nothing." "I believe you are not right about that," Chekhov said. "The training will serve you well, do not worry, and let me tell you, you will never stop experiencing that adrenaline rush. Your mind goes completely blank for an instant, and all you feel is the urge to either flee or fight. This never goes away, my friend." "Then I'll never be effective in a real-life situation." "It never leaves you, but that moment of pure terror becomes shorter and shorter. The more you are used to it, and then your training kicks in, you will know what to do." "You sure did," said Thibodeau. "That was amazing." Chekhov shook his head. "It is something Commander Spock has done for me more than once. Perhaps not in the exact same manner, of course, but he has certainly prevented harm from coming to me." Chekhov gestured around himself at the others in the rec room. "That's what it means to be a part of this crew. You don't just look out for one another. After a while, you owe one another your lives. Everyone understands this, and yet we seldom mention it to one another. It is a fact of life on a starship such as this." Chekhov took another sip of his vodka and smiled. "Especially under Captain Kirk. He does take the mission of this vessel seriously. He's becoming a legend back at the Academy, and I made an idiot blunder right in front of him." "Don't let it define you. Learn from it," Chekhov said. He raised his glass. "Here's to your first real landing party mission. May there be many other adventures." "That I don't quite mess up so badly." The navigator nodded but said nothing and took his sip. Jerry Thibodeau would be all right, Chekhov was fairly certain. They finished their drinks and headed off to their quarters for rest period. Soon it would be time to return to duty. Chekhov looked forward to it. What he hadn't told Thibodeau, because the young man would soon find out for himself, was that danger and action had their rewards as well as their costs. The adrenaline surge went both ways. After experiencing it a few times, one might not only stop dreading it, but come to enjoy it. This was the real secret of a Starfleet officer learned after a while. The fact that no other life could ever be quite as satisfying. "At least not to me," Chekhov thought. He yawned as he came to the door of his personal quarters, and realized he really did need that bit of scheduled downtime. Duty would call soon enough, and he planned to be ready. Kirk contemplated the view screen on the bridge as Spock and Uhura worked together on an idea suggested by the communications officer. Communications and records had been wiped from the Zeta Gibraltar computer, but she had managed to locate what proved to be an overlooked file of meteorological events on the planet's surface. Going through this and knowing the approximate time of the raid, or whatever had occurred at the outpost, Uhura pinpointed a momentary surge in nearby temperatures and the same curious ion signature that Spock's tricorder had picked up at the blast site. The outpost equipment was more sensitive than the tricorder, and Spock and Uhura were narrowing down the identification characteristics by running both scans through the Enterprise's state-of-the-art information comparison programs. The planet below had no large bodies of water. Most of what water there was occurred in the subsurface. This led to a planetary appearance that varied from light brown to chocolate orange, interspaced by the ubiquitous blue smears where there were concentrations of the planetary algal plants. Zeta Gibraltar was not a very inviting place when viewing from space. The planetoid did have one singular characteristic, however. It was on an extreme outlying tendril of Federation territory and was the farthest full-time inhabited planet from Earth in Federation space. After Spock's close call, Kirk had examined the white item he had found in those blue bushes. A gentleman's silk cravat. Silk? Wood? Wool? What did it add up to? One thing he knew, he had a missing outpost crew, and he had to find them. A data slate was handed to Kirk by a yeoman, and he rose and stretched before signing it and handing the slate back. Spock, anything? Spock turned from the communications console. Affirmative, Captain. We have isolated the ion signature. It is indeed that of a craft using matter-antimatter propulsion. It's also unique, Captain, Uhura said. We should be able to identify it. Spock stepped back over to his science console. Running sensor sweep now, sir, he said. It may be possible to... Yes, there. What is it, Spock? An ion trail leading away from the planet, Captain. It matches the signature the lieutenant and I found within the planetary records, as well as my tricorder readings. Can we follow it? Transferring path out of the system to navigation now. Excellent work, Spock. Uhura. Kirk sat back down. Now they were getting somewhere. Helmsman, take her about. Mr. Sulu, follow that ion trail. Aye, Captain. It did not take long to see exactly where the ion trail was leading them, out of the Zeta Gibraltar system and straight into the glowing dust and debris of the mysterious Vara Nebula. Chapter 3. Captain's Log. Supplemental. We are venturing into one of the great melting pots and star forges of our galaxy, the Vara Nebula. We are following an ion trail with a unique signature that we believe was left by a ship carrying the Zeta Gibraltar Science Station personnel. The trail has led us directly into a dangerous region of the nebula. We are being buffeted by meteoroid strikes, but we are still venturing forward in hopes of bringing home the Zeta Gibraltar staff. Kirk was glad to see Chekhov report to the bridge just as the Enterprise reached the nebula's outer boundaries. This was going to be a tricky passage, and Chekhov had not only great skill, but something that it was impossible to teach to a navigation officer. Excellent intuition. Much would depend on the young ensign. The Enterprise forged ahead for several hours through the material miasma of the outer Vera, shields up, but not yet at maximum. There was simply no way to journey into the nebula without encouraging micrometeoroids, and quite a few that were not so micro at all. The ship was buffeted by several large strikes, but the shields held and had remained at full power. He could not order them to absolute maximum because of the nebula's interference with the sensors, which meant that a portion of the energy of any large meteoroid strike would be transferred the shields through to the physical structure of the ship. This was unavoidable. They must be able to use maximum sensors to track the ion trail, but the safety of the Enterprise was also uppermost in Kirk's mind. It was a fine balance. The captain touched a button on his console. Engineering report. Are we still within structural limitations? Scott's voice answered over the ship's intership. Aye, Captain. She's holding together, but I don't like it. There's only so much of this she can take, and then something's bound to give. Keep an eye out on the situation, Scotty, said Kirk. We wouldn't be pushing forward under these conditions if there wasn't a high probability that lives are on the line. Understood, Captain, Scott answered, sounding only a trifle mollified. We'll do everything we can to hold her together. I hope we can find out who or what we're looking for sooner rather than later and get the ship out of here. I hope so too, Scotty. Bridge out. Moments later, a whistle came from the command chair intership. Sick bay to bridge. Kirk activated the intercom channel. Kirk here, sick bay. We've finished analysis on that very odd surprise you brought up for us from the planetoid's surface. The familiar drawl of a gentleman from the North American South let him know his friend and the Enterprise's chief medical officer, Leonard McCoy, was speaking. What have you got for me, Bones? It matches no known current species, but I seem to recall something from a paper I read a while back about forensics research on a set of historical remains. There was a report of that DNA having an odd triplicate structure, so I ran a check and it matched up. Jim, that arm belongs to a member of the species known as the Lorraine. The Lorraine? The old pirates the Federation sent packing a long time ago? About 75 years, McCoy said. They had 3 sexes. Have, I should say. That arm belongs to a hermaphrodite of the species. Interesting, said Kirk. Good work, Bones. Got another surprise for you, Captain. Yes? The manner in which that extremity was separated from its unfortunate former owner, McCoy said. He paused a moment for effect, then delivered his verdict. A blade. As in a knife? Something that could shear through it in one cut, McCoy replied. I'd say a battle axe or sword. This was getting more interesting by the minute. Thanks, Bones, he replied. Keep at it. Bridge out. Kirk turned back to the view screen and sat musing as the nebular debris flew by. At least now he knew his likely quarry, the La Lorraine pirates, the last of whom had been encountered and defeated 75 years ago. A few moments later, Spock turned from his constant monitoring at the science station's sensor readouts. Sir, we have lost the ion trail. Lost it? Can we get it back? I do not think so. I have attempted to employ multiple methods. Kirk touched a hand to his chin, considering. To have come so far and risked lives, only to reach a dead end. Without that trail, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The nebula was a vast hiding place many light years across, yet Kirk knew he wouldn't give up the search if any chance of finding the outpost personnel remained. What about long-range probes, Spock? Can we send them out in a radial sweep? It would require some adjustment to their sensory programming and shielding characteristics. 10 minutes if I'm able to work steadily. Do it, Mr. Spock. Kirk turned back to the helm. Bring us to a stop exactly where that ion trail ran out, Chekhov. I want to be able to follow that breadcrumb trail back home if need be. Aye, aye, sir. Spock completed his modifications, and the probes were launched. Kirk settled in for a long wait, but surprisingly, one of the probes soon streaked back. And, when it came within close enough range that the nebula's natural radiation didn't scramble its communication channels, it sent its report. Captain, Probe 7 seems to have found something, or multiple somethings, Uhura said, turning in her bridge chair. It is sending a full report, including images. On screen, said Kirk. The display showed faint traces of structures that looked very much like 2 spread hands joined together at the thumbs. Weird, but obviously created by intelligent life. Sensor readings confirmed that there were beings within those structures. A quick pullback and size comparison revealed they were in fact slightly smaller than the Enterprise. 4 of them. The ion trail signature was all around them. Those are ships, Kirk said. I concur, Captain, said Spock. They were several thousand kilometers away, hidden within a cloud of dust that looked, upon examination, suspiciously globular, as if it had been created on purpose. Its center was rocky and had the readings profile of an asteroid. So that dust globe is likely camouflage, Kirk thought. It's a meet-up spot, or a transfer station. A treasure island, perhaps. Let's find out what it's hiding. That's enough, Lieutenant. Thank you, Kirk said, indicating with a finger that Uhura could return the view screen to its customary exterior display. Release a navigational beacon to mark our present position, Mr. Sulu. And then let's go and have a closer look at those ships. Aye, sir. All sensors forward, Mr. Spock. I don't want any nasty surprises. Sensors forward. Kirk stared at the view screen, nothing but dust flying past on all sides. Like looking up into a rainstorm, he thought, if the rain were rocks moving at thousands of kilometers an hour speed. The globular cloud was a darker patch ahead of them. Uhura switched the view screen display to infrared, and the false color imagery showed reddish bodies, with the curious hand-like shapes, with in a cloud of yellow and oranges. The pirates. Intercepting various communication frequencies, Captain, Uhura said. Subspace? Negative, sir. Electromagnetic. They are old-fashioned radio waves. Please put it on the bridge audio, Lieutenant. Switching over. A patch of static and then a spate of word-like guttural sounds that Kirk could have sworn was cursing. Spock looked up from his sensors, intrigued. Words, Spock? Kirk said. That would be my guess, Captain. Although, Uhura interrupted. Captain, the signal modulation correlates with a known language. Don't tell me, Lieutenant. Is it La Hurain? Uhura's face took on a look of surprise. Yes, sir. That's exactly what it is. Then let's have a translation. Working on it, Captain, answered Uhura. The Universal Translator should have it now. Suddenly, the sounds coming over audio began to make sense. You stupid, foolish stump walker. If you don't get back here this instant with the bounty, I'm going to blow you out of the sky. Is he talking to us? Said Sulu, looking up from his helm console with some alarm. No, I don't think so, Kirk replied. As if to confirm this, another voice broke in, replying to the first one with a taunt. You try and make me, you virus-brained moron. The Haradrians will pay a lot more in credits for this lot than your sorry pay will ever add up to. We're leaving, and you can't stop us. I'll blast you from the sky. And destroy your precious slave consignment? I don't think so, Urget. Damn you, Splo. You won't get away with this. Oh, but I will. You're the one who's going to be out of luck this time, you old tyrant. Looks like we've arrived at a bad time for them, but a good time for us, Kirk said. Mr. Sulu, find a place nearby to hide us from sensors while those two squabble. Perhaps a radiant hotspot that will conceal us in its general brightness. I want to assess the situation before we act. Aye, sir. Kirk turned to Spock. Who have we got that's a 22nd century scholar, Mr. Spock? I believe Lieutenant Julia Tanner is an expert in that era, Captain. Uhura, report on what we've found. I want to know everything she can tell us about the days of the Rahane piracy. Aye, sir. Have Dr. McCoy, Mr. Scott, and Lieutenant Tanner report to the briefing room in 20 minutes. You and Mr. Spock will join us. I want a full situation report. Yes, sir. Also, prepare a drone to send to that edge of the nebula. I'll dictate a report for Starfleet Command for subspace transmission. We want them to know what we're doing in here, since we can't communicate with them directly due to subspace interference. Drone already in launch tube, said Uhura with a smile. As soon as the nebula began to block our subspace communications, it seemed like a good idea to have it ready for immediate deployment. Good call, Lieutenant, Kirk replied. After handing off the bridge to Sulu, he quickly made his way to his quarters to compose his report. Kirk reflected that he might have dictated his report on the bridge, but he planned to include a few pointed words as to not being informed of whatever was going on at what was supposed to be a regular science outpost on Zeta Gibraltar. Lieutenants Tanner and Uhura were engaged in a deep discussion when Kirk and Spock entered the conference room. Scott was present. McCoy was there as well, clearly chafing at being pulled away from his sick bay. Kirk's intuition told him he might need the doctor's advice very soon, however. Kirk sat down at the head of the triangle-shaped table. Report. What do we have? The language is not classic La Rahane, but a variant dialect, said Lieutenant Tanner. She was a petite woman in a blue science officer's uniform. Her most exceptional feature was her lustrous eyes. Kirk reflected that she must have thought so too. She surrounded them with a line of dark eyeliner of an almost ancient Egyptian thickness. The La Rahane pirates roamed a large portion of the Alpha Quadrant in their day. They were taken on and resoundingly defeated in 2173. It was believed that all spacefaring technology available to them had been destroyed. Obviously, we need to modify that supposition. Tanner nodded toward the TriViewer, where she clicked through several blurry photographs and an artistic rendition of the La Rahane. They were generally humanoid in appearance, but their noses were turned upward and possessed a triad of nostrils. Shouldn't judge by appearances, Kirk thought, but they do look a bit like pigs. The La Rahane were not a creative species. Instead, they specialized in either begging or stealing the technology of others. According to the few records they kept, they had originally come from a pre-warp planet when some hapless visitor crash-landed his ship. Although their homeworld was never located, after the defeat in 2173, it was believed that the La Rahane homeworld contained all that remained of the species. Considering their technological level, sector quarantine was deemed suitable. Another assumption we are going to be modifying. Lieutenant Tanner explained something else to me, Captain, Uhura said, cutting in. The La Rahane weren't merely pirates. Primarily, they were slavers. She pronounced this last statement with disgust in her voice. They raided worlds with their stolen technology, took away entire shiploads of the natives as slaves, and sold them. Sold them to whom? To the highest bidder, Tanner answered. Another unexplained datum, Captain. The ships that La Rahane operated were believed to be the last remnants of the Heradrian navy. But the Heradrian Empire hasn't existed since the 21st century. It was in ruins 75 years ago, said Kirk. This is quite true, Spock said. There are Heradrian ruins on a broad swath of worlds across the entire Alpha Quadrant. The Empire was at its zenith during Earth's 20th and 21st centuries. It had a rapid decline and fall during Earth's 22nd century. Spock cocked his head in a reflective pose. It is fortunate that the Heradrians never happened upon your home system, Captain. There would have been little chance that human technology of the time would have stood up to the Heradrian firepower. That's very true, said Tanner. The Heradrian Empire was based on forced labor of multiple species, slavery, in other words. Machinery and automation were kept in the hands of the upper class, and ruling castes so that they could retain power. It was a system that functioned for several centuries. But the slaves ultimately rebelled, as I remember. It brought down the Empire. In truth, Captain, that is one of the big questions of the Heradrian scholarship. Did the Empire fall because of a slave revolt, or were the revolts because the Empire was crumbling? Tanner said. So, the La Rahane flew Heradrian ships, but the Heradrians were also their best customers, Kirk offered. Exactly, said Uhura. Toward the end of the Heradrian Empire, they existed in a sort of social symbiosis, Tanner continued. She was beginning to grow a bit breathless, her enthusiasm for her subject coming to the fore. From what we have pieced together from the Heradrian archives, the La Rahane pirate lanes fit neatly into the remains of the Heradrian Empire. As the Empire crumbled, the La Rahane preyed on Heradrian outlying worlds to provide slaves to the worlds on the interior. Tanner looked at Kirk imploringly. Captain, we have an amazing opportunity for study. Those La Rahane ships are new, and they are very likely Heradrian in origin. That means there must be a remnant of the Heradrian Empire somewhere beyond the Vera Nebula, perhaps close by. McCoy looked like he was about to come out of his seat, so agitated was he. Need I remind you, Lieutenant, that the Heradrians were not merely notorious slaveholders. They got rid of their elderly slaves in centralized concentration camps. I remember my history, too, and from every record the Heradrians left behind, we can infer that the Empire was a vicious state built on coercion of innocent beings. Tanner seemed taken aback. She hadn't been ready for a full broadside from the ship's doctor. But damn it, McCoy was right. The only reason Kirk could imagine that he'd like to rediscover the Heradrian Empire would be to free its slaves and kill its leaders in horrible ways. This, he realized, was a violation of the Prime Directive. Captain, Spock put in, the La Rahane and not the Heradrians are our present problem. Well, if they are these La Rahane pirates, then there's hope the outpost staff is alive, McCoy stated. Assuming they were taken into a slave-gathering raid, then the La Rahane wouldn't want to murder the merchandise. Precisely, said Spock. If the La Rahane still traffic in interspecies slavery, perhaps the outpost personnel are to be sold as chattel. We may also find them gathered in one place. Agreed, said Kirk. Put together an armed landing party to go down to that asteroid, and let's look around for our missing colonists. Transporting is going to be a wee bit tricky, sir. said Scott. With conditions in this nebula, I highly recommend taking a shuttlecraft. Agreed, Mr. Scott. In the meantime, that ship, whatever its captain's motives are, cannot be allowed to go anywhere. We'll have to see to that with tractor beams. If those won't work, we'll use phasers only as a last resort, as that would surely give away our position in the nebula cloud. Aye, sir. I'll direct all auxiliary energy to the tractor beams, said Scott. I believe we can hold that ship if it comes to it. Kirk glanced at Scott. We'll also need to sweep the surrounding area for more vessels. I don't want to get a nasty surprise that... Suddenly, a loud blast came from the ship's intraship. It was the alarm that announced a ship-wide red alert. Kirk thumbed an intraship set in the center of the conference room table. Mr. Sulu, report. Captain, the nebula Detrius is no longer concealing us to their sensors. We have been detected and are under attack. 4 pirate vessels approaching. Their weapons are hot, sir, and they are deploying torpedoes. Shields to maximum, Kirk immediately responded. On our way. Kirk paused a moment considering. Sulu, whatever you do, do not, I repeat, do not destroy those ships. Alright guys, that is the end of chapters 2 and 3. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll be getting to the next chapters soon enough. If they're big enough, I'll probably go back to 1 chapter. If they are short chapters, I'll be doing 2. Wolf of Dimensions, signing off.